"Your dock's in violation again," Patricia Larkin said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the morning air. She stood at the shoreline with her clipboard angled like a weapon, the smug tilt of her chin daring me to argue. "Replace the railing or face daily fines. We've been more than patient, Daniel. The board won't wait any longer." I didn't flinch. I let her words hang there, the breeze tugging at the water's surface, the sun glinting off the empty lines of my father's hand-carved dock. Then I said quietly, "Funny thing, Patricia. You keep quoting bylaws from a charter that doesn't exist anymore." Her smile faltered just enough for me to notice. That half-second crack was all I needed to know she hadn't seen the flaw coming. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. "My name's Daniel Reeve," I continued, my voice steady. "And I'm not just another homeowner you can push around. My father built this dock, every nail, every rail. He bled for this place long before your signature ever appeared on a board letterhead. And I don't back down when it comes to legacy." I glanced at the dock, the wood worn smooth where my kids had fished off the edge last summer. My father's final project before his health gave out. The railing still smelled faintly of cedar oil he'd rubbed in with his own hands. Patricia wasn't just threatening lumber. She was trying to erase the last physical piece of him. That was the line I wouldn't let her cross. "You know what gets me?" I said, stepping closer so she couldn't miss a word. "This isn't about safety. It's about control. You want uniformity. You want power. But you picked the wrong target." She shifted her weight, trying to reassert confidence. "The board will enforce compliance, Mr. Reeve. Whether you like it or not," I said under my breath, as though speaking more to the moment than to her. I could feel that spark building, the kind you only get when someone's underestimated you for the last time. I folded the violation notice she'd handed me and slid it into my jacket. Not a scrap of paper would leave my possession now. Chain of custody mattered. The letterhead was off. The incorporation date didn't match. Even the seal looked faded, like it hadn't been renewed. Every detail was another thread to pull, and I had the patience to unravel all of it. "You think this dock is my weakness," I said softly. "But it's the reason I won't quit. My father built it so his family would always have a place to belong, and I intend to keep it standing." For a long moment, the only sound was the distant slap of water against the pilings. Patricia pressed her lips together, then turned on her heel. "Expect the fines to start tomorrow morning," she said, walking back toward her car. I stayed by the railing, running my hand over the grain. I could still picture my dad crouched here, sanding in slow circles, sweat dripping into the lake as the sun sank behind the trees. He told me once, "This dock's more than boards. It's proof we belonged here before anyone could say otherwise." Patricia didn't realize it yet. But by choosing this dock as her battleground, she'd chosen the one fight I'd never walk away from. Where are you watching from? Because if you've ever stood your ground against someone convinced they hold all the power, you already know how this ends. And Patricia? She was about to find out the hard way that she'd picked the wrong man to try and break. Patricia's taillights disappeared down the narrow lane, but her shadow lingered over the community like a storm cloud. By the next morning, word had already spread. Neighbors whispered about the Reeve dock case, as if it were another HOA spectacle, another chance to watch Patricia flex her authority. The grocery store lot buzzed with it. Even at the gas pump, I caught fragments: fines, violations, rebellion. They didn't know half of it, but the gossip was gasoline to Patricia's fire. I walked into Willow Crest's clubhouse that evening. The walls were plastered with glossy posters of the lake, photoshopped to perfection, water gleaming like glass, not a trace of the mud and algae the drainage had left in recent years. Patricia sat at the front table, pen tapping against her binder, already preparing the next enforcement letter. Around her sat the board, Marcus with his banker's glare, Susan flipping through financial sheets as if property values were all that mattered. Their eyes flicked toward me, but quickly back to Patricia, like birds too scared to look away from their handler. I knew the type, fear masquerading as order. "Mr. Reeve," Patricia said without even lifting her head, "the board has voted unanimously to begin fines. $25 per day until your railing is replaced with the approved aluminum model. Any further resistance will result in lien proceedings." Her tone was practiced smug. I didn't respond right away. I looked instead at the posters, the lake shimmering, my father's dock absent from the frame. They wanted to rewrite the story of this community, and step one was erasing everything that didn't fit their glossy narrative. "You all know my dock's older than this board," I said finally. "It was permitted through the county before half these homes existed. But let's talk about what really matters. You drained the lake last year without permits. Wildlife killed, property values tanked, and you dare talk about compliance?" The room stiffened. A couple of neighbors shifted in their seats. Marcus cleared his throat, ready to defend Patricia, but I pressed on. "This isn't about one railing. It's about power. You've turned compliance into punishment. And the moment anyone resists, you escalate. That's not governance. That's abuse." Patricia smiled thinly. "You've made your point. You may leave." I leaned closer to the table, my voice low. "Not until you understand that your charter, your entire legal standing, lapsed 2 years ago. You have no authority to fine, to lien, or to dictate anything." I let the words hang. Just a taste, a warning. For a heartbeat, even Susan's pen froze mid-stroke. Patricia recovered quickly, her tone icy. "We'll see about that. Because moments like that, when the bully realizes you might not be powerless, are the cracks you can pry open wider." I left the clubhouse, but I could feel the ripples. Whispers followed me out into the night air, neighbors murmuring, weighing their loyalties. Patricia still held the gavel, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. At home, Emily sat on the porch steps, sketchbook balanced on her knees. She'd drawn the dock, the lake, full and alive, her grandfather's old fishing hat perched on the railing. I crouched beside her, the cedar scent clinging to my hands. "Are they really going to take it away?" she asked softly. "Not if I can help it," I said. "This isn't just wood, Em. It's a promise, and sometimes promises need defending." She leaned against my shoulder, and I felt the weight of every eye in the neighborhood pressing down. This fight was no longer private. Patricia had made sure of that. The clubhouse lights glowed across the lake, casting long reflections on the water. I knew inside, Patricia was already planning her next move. What she didn't know was that I was planning mine too. And unlike her, I played by rules she couldn't afford to break. The board thought they had cornered me with fines and threats, but in truth, they'd just opened the first door to their own undoing. The next morning, I walked down to the maintenance shed near the community tennis courts. The place smelled of oil and damp earth, the kind of scent that clung to everything Mark Ellis touched. He was there as always, pushing a broom across the concrete, his cap pulled low. From a distance, he looked steady, dependable. Up close, his body told a different story. Shoulders hunched too tightly, hands gripping the broomstick, as if it were the only thing keeping him from unraveling. "Morning, Mark," I said, my voice even. He didn't look up, just shifted the broom from one side to the other. The scrape echoed in the shed, sharp against the silence. "Morning, mister." "Reeve." His tone was polite, but the stiffness in his jaw betrayed something else. I leaned against the doorway, letting the moment breathe. Mark was more than the groundskeeper here. He was the one who had been present when Patricia ordered contractors onto the lake, when the pumps roared to life without permits. He had seen it all, and I could sense the weight pressing down on him. "You were there last year," I said carefully, "when they drained the water." His broom froze mid-sweep. A pause, then a slow exhale. "I don't know what you're talking about." His voice cracked at the edges, betraying nerves he couldn't control. His fingers tightened on the broomstick until his knuckles whitened. "Mark," I said softly, "you don't have to say anything you're not ready to. But I can see this is eating at you." He finally lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, tired, darting toward the open door, as if afraid someone might overhear. His lips parted, then pressed shut again. He swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing. "You should let this go," he whispered. I shook my head. "I can't. My father's dock matters too much. And what Patricia did, it's bigger than one railing." Mark rubbed the back of his neck, his posture collapsing inward. The man looked like he was carrying 2 lives' worth of secrets, each one heavier than the last. He turned his back to me, fiddling with a wrench on the counter, though it was already polished clean. "You don't understand," he muttered. "I've got a mortgage, kids in school. If I cross her, I lose everything." His voice broke on the last word, like a truth dragged unwillingly into daylight. Because standing on the edge of silence like Mark was, choosing between truth and survival, is what gives this fight its stakes. "You're not the only one Patricia's cornered," I told him. "She's made this neighborhood afraid of her." But fear doesn't last when the law catches up. He gripped the wrench tighter, metal clinking against the counter. His shoulders trembled just slightly, like he wanted to hand me the truth but couldn't force it past his lips. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder, eyes wide, pupils darting toward the clubhouse across the lawn. Even here, in the shed, he expected her shadow to fall through the door. "Careful," he whispered. "She watches everything." That was enough. He hadn't confessed, not outright, but his body had told me what his voice refused to. The way he froze, the way his hands shook, the way his eyes flickered every time Patricia's name surfaced. It was confirmation. He knew what she'd done, and he knew it was wrong. I stepped back into the sunlight, leaving him with his broom and his fear. My father used to say, "Some men carry guilt like water in a bucket. You can see it slosh every time they move." Mark's bucket was full to the brim. Walking back toward my house, I thought of Emily sketching the dock, the cedar railing etched into her paper, as if she could protect it with pencil lines alone. Mark might not be ready now, but sooner or later, the truth he carried would spill. And when it did, Patricia wouldn't just be fighting me. She'd be fighting the very people she thought she controlled. The stage was set. All it needed was the first crack in the dam. The stage was set. All it needed was the first crack in the dam. That crack came sooner than I expected. 2 days later, a bright orange. Notice flapped against my front door in the morning breeze. The paper was thicker than usual, stamped with bold black letters. Final warning, Leon proceedings pending. Patricia hadn't wasted any time escalating. She wanted to make an example out of me, and she was doing it publicly. I pulled the notice free, the adhesive tearing against the wood. My knuckles brushed the cedar frame of the door, and I thought about my father's calloused hands doing the same years ago. This wasn't just about my dock anymore. Patricia was putting a target on my entire home, my family's stability, everything we'd built. Neighbors drifted by on their morning walks, their dogs tugging at leashes, eyes cutting toward me, but quickly darting away. They had seen the notice. That was the point. Patricia wanted fear, silence, compliance. She knew shame was a powerful weapon, but I had seen enough weaponized paper in my career to know it cut both ways. I carried the notice with me to the county office that afternoon. The place was sterile, all fluorescent lights and beige walls, but it had one thing Patricia couldn't bend to her will: records. Real, official, binding records. The clerk at the counter barely looked up as I slid the notice toward her. "Need to verify something," I said. "HOA Lion Authority for Willow Crest Estates." She typed quickly, nails clicking against the keys. "You said Willow Crest?" "That's right." Her brow furrowed. She clicked again, then again, her screen glowing pale blue across her glasses. "Strange. I'm not seeing active incorporation documents. The last filing shows as expired." There it was. Confirmation. The corporate charter had lapsed. No authority to fine, no authority to lien, nothing. Patricia had built her castle on sand. Victory, strategy, progress. This was the moment I needed, the first piece of undeniable proof that the board's power was smoke and mirrors. They'd been acting as if they were law, but legally they weren't even an entity anymore. "Could you print that?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. The clerk nodded, printer spitting out crisp sheets. I folded them neatly, slid them into my folder, and thanked her. Every detail mattered: chain of custody, timestamp, seal. Patricia thought intimidation worked in the shadows. I preferred daylight. Because this right here, was where the tables began to turn. When I stepped outside, the late afternoon sun burned hot against the pavement. My phone buzzed with a message from Emily. She posted something about us on the community page. My gut tightened. Patricia was moving fast, weaving her narrative before I could reveal mine. By the time I reached home, the post had already circulated. A photo of my dock, cropped close on the railing, captioned, "Non-compliant structure threatens community safety. Resident refuses to cooperate. board forced to take legal action. The comments section was split. Some neighbors parroted Patricia's line, worried about property values. Others asked questions. What safety issue? Didn't that dock pass inspection years ago? Seeds of doubt again, growing in places Patricia couldn't control. That night, I walked the length of the dock alone. The water lapped against the posts, a rhythm older than the neighborhood itself. I thought of my father sanding the railing, Emily sketching it, Mark gripping his broom with white knuckles. This dock wasn't just wood. It was witness, anchor, and battlefield. Patricia thought she could drain the lake, erase the past, silence the present. But the truth was already moving, quiet and unstoppable, like water seeping through cracks in a dam. And I had just found the pressure point that would break it wide open. The next morning, I drove into town and parked outside the county courthouse. The building loomed, all gray stone and heavy doors, but I'd walked these halls 1,000 times in my career. This time was different. I wasn't the attorney general standing on official business. I was a homeowner defending his family's legacy. Still, the law didn't care about titles. It cared about records, filings, and signatures. Or, in Patricia's case, the lack of them. Inside, the clerk's office buzzed with quiet activity. Lawyers shuffled past, clerks stamped documents, the steady hum of government machinery at work. I stepped up to the counter and asked for the full incorporation history of Willowcrest Estates Homeowners Association. The young clerk behind the glass looked at me curiously, but she tapped at her keyboard and soon disappeared into a back room. Minutes later, she returned with a thick file, bound with a worn string. She slid it across the counter. Everything on record. I opened it on the spot, flipping past pages of bylaws, amendments, and signatures that grew fainter with time. Then I found it. The annual registration that should have been renewed every year. The last filing date was over 2 years ago. No updates, no renewals. The HOA had effectively dissolved itself by negligence, yet Patricia was still handing out fines and threatening liens, as if her authority were unshakable. Victory, strategy, progress. This was the discovery phase, proof that the HOA had no standing. The paper trail wasn't just flawed, it was broken. Legally, Patricia and her board had no right to govern anyone. I snapped photos with my phone, each page captured clearly, time-stamped, undeniable. Then I placed the file back on the counter and asked for certified copies. When the clerk stamped the documents with the county seal, I felt the weight of the fight shift. Patricia had been brandishing threats like weapons. Now, I had something sharper. Walking out into the courthouse steps, I paused to breathe in the crisp morning air. The stone beneath my feet radiated heat from the sun, and the hum of traffic wrapped around me like background. Noise. In my pocket, the documents pulsed with potential. Patricia thought she held all the cards. She had no idea she'd been playing without a deck, because right now, I held the one thing Patricia couldn't spin. The truth in black and white. As I started down the steps, a familiar voice called out, "Daniel." It was Susan, the treasurer from the board. She stood near the sidewalk, clutching her purse tightly. Her face looked drawn, eyes darting like she expected Patricia to appear behind her. "You shouldn't be digging into this," she whispered. "Patricia, she doesn't forgive. She'll ruin you." I stopped a few feet from her. "She's already trying." Susan's shoulders sagged. Her fingers trembled against the leather strap of her purse. "I never signed up for this. I thought the board was supposed to serve the neighborhood, not punish it. But Patricia, she's different when the doors close." Her confession was more than words. It was confirmation from within. The cracks were spreading. Even Patricia's inner circle wasn't immune to doubt. "You don't have to cover for her anymore," I said quietly. "Soon enough, the law will speak louder than her threats." Susan shook her head quickly and backed away, disappearing into the crowd before she could say more. But I'd seen enough. The conflict wasn't just me against Patricia anymore. It was Patricia against the truth, against her own people, against the law itself. That evening, I sat on the dock with Emily. The water was still, glassy under the fading light. She sketched again, her pencil scratching across the page. I let the silence stretch, the cedar railing warm beneath my hand. "You look different," she said finally. Like you know something. I smiled faintly. I do. Because now I had proof. Proof that Patricia's empire was nothing more than paper. And soon, the entire community would see it crumble. Because now I had proof. Proof that Patricia's empire was nothing more than paper. And soon, the entire community would see it crumble. 2 days later, Patricia forced my hand. A certified letter arrived, hand-delivered by courier, stamped with the HOA's seal. I slid it open at my kitchen table, Emily watching anxiously from across the room. The letter announced the board's intent to begin foreclosure proceedings on my home if I didn't bring the dock into compliance within 10 days. It was their boldest move yet. My stomach tightened, but not with fear, with resolve. They had overreached. Foreclosure wasn't just intimidation, it was a nuclear strike, and they didn't have the authority to launch it. I slipped the letter into my folder beside the certified county documents. Evidence of their bluff, evidence of their fraud. Together, the two pieces were dynamite waiting for a spark. That evening, I attended the neighborhood barbecue at the community park. The smell of grilled burgers drifted across the grass. Kids chased each other under the oak trees, and yet tension simmered beneath the laughter. Conversations hushed when I walked by, eyes sliding from my face to the folder under my arm. Patricia stood near the pavilion, smiling too brightly, clutching a glass of lemonade like it was a part of her costume. She spotted me instantly. "Mr. Reeve," she said, voice dripping with mock hospitality. "Enjoying yourself?" I held her gaze. "I will be." Her jaw tightened, but she kept smiling. Around us, neighbors leaned in, listening. Patricia thrived on spectacle, but she didn't realize she'd just stepped onto my stage. Mark Ellis worked the grill, spatula in hand. His posture told the story of his conscience, back stiff, eyes flicking from me to Patricia, sweat beading at his temple even in the shade. He looked like a man torn in two. I gave him a nod. He looked away quickly, flipping a burger that didn't need flipping. Victory strategy progress. This was escalation, the moment the HOA's bluff turned personal and urgent. Their foreclosure threat crossed the line from nuisance to existential, and here, in front of the whole neighborhood, was the perfect place to plant my counterstrike. I waited until Patricia moved on, chatting with Marcus and Susan under the pavilion lights. Then I found a spot by the picnic tables where everyone could see. I placed the foreclosure letter on the wood, weighted down by my father's old fishing knife. The sight drew curious eyes. "This," I said loudly enough for nearby conversations to pause, "is what your board does when you don't bow to them. They threaten to take your home." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Patricia turned, her smile cracking. "But here's the truth," I continued, tapping the folder. "They don't even have the authority to send this. The HOA's charter expired more than 2 years ago. Legally, they don't exist. Every fine, every threat, every so-called vote, it's all smoke and mirrors." The air went still. Neighbors looked from me to Patricia, confusion in their eyes, doubt gnawing at their loyalty. Patricia strode forward, face flushed. "Don't listen to him," she snapped. "He's twisting facts to avoid compliance." I slid one of the certified county documents from the folder, holding it up so the seal caught the light. "This isn't my word. It's the county's. Anyone can check the record. They let their filing lapse, and now they're pretending it never happened." Patricia faltered, but her instinct was to double down. "We'll resolve this in court," she spat, though her voice cracked. "Good," I said calmly, "because that's where truth is binding." I gathered the documents, slid them back into the folder, and left the letter pinned under the knife for all to see. As I walked away, I could hear the shift, neighbors whispering, questioning, breaking free from her narrative. Emily met me at the car, her eyes wide. "Dad, did you see their faces?" I smiled faintly. I did. The battle wasn't over, but Patricia had just lost her grip on silence. The neighborhood had seen the first fracture, and fractures spread fast. The neighborhood had seen the first fracture, and fractures spread fast. That night, long after the barbecue crowd had thinned and porch lights flickered on across Willow Crest, I heard a knock at my door. It wasn't sharp or commanding, more hesitant, like someone checking to see if they still had the courage to follow through. When I opened it, Mark Ellis stood there, cap in hand, eyes shifting toward the dark street behind him. "Can I come in?" he asked. His voice was low, heavy. I nodded and stepped aside. He shuffled in, shoulders rounded as if bracing for a blow. Emily had already gone upstairs, so it was just the two of us in the dim light of the kitchen. Mark set his cap on the table, then sat, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his hands twisted together until his knuckles went pale. "I can't keep carrying this," he said finally. "I've watched too much." I poured him a glass of water and slid it across. He didn't drink, just stared at the condensation pooling on the wood. His chest rose and fell unevenly, the words fighting their way out. "You know about the lake," he whispered. I stayed quiet, letting him find his rhythm. "They drained it because Patricia wanted leverage," he continued. "Said the docks made the place look old, cluttered. Wanted to call it an environmental management project, but no permits were ever filed. I was ordered to stand guard while the pumps ran. Fish died, birds scattered, and I watched it all happen." His voice cracked. "I should have stopped it, but I needed this job." His confession hung in the air, raw and jagged. He rubbed his temples like he could scrub the guilt away. "Mark," I said gently, "you're not the villain here. She is, but your testimony, your knowledge, can change everything." He shook his head quickly, panic flickering in his eyes. "You don't get it. Patricia keeps files on people. Debts, fines, personal mistakes. She uses them like chains. If she finds out I spoke to you, she'll bury me." I leaned forward. "She already buried the lake. If she isn't stopped, she'll bury the whole community. But the law doesn't bend to her, not when someone like you tells the truth." Mark's hands trembled as he finally reached for the water. He drank, then set the glass down with a soft clink. "There's more," he admitted, voice dropping. "When she sent that foreclosure letter, she told Marcus to push it through fast, even without proper filing. Said nobody would challenge it because everyone's too scared. She knew the charter was expired. She laughed about it behind closed doors, said, 'What's he gonna do, sue us?' He'd never risk it." Victory strategy progress. This was the moment the conflicted witness shifted sides. Mark had given me more than guilt. He'd given me Patricia's intent, proof of willful abuse, not ignorance, malice. "Will you testify to that?" I asked. Mark rubbed the back of his neck, eyes darting again to the window. I don't know. Standing up to her feels like standing in front of a moving truck. You won't be standing alone," I said firmly. "You'll be standing with the law. And with me?" His posture softened just slightly. The bucket he carried, overflowing with secrets, had spilled onto my table. And once spilled, there was no going back. Because that's exactly what Mark had done. He cracked the dam wider, letting truth flood in. He stood after a long silence, grabbing his cap. "I'll think about it," he muttered, though his eyes carried the weight of a man who already knew he'd crossed the line. As he slipped out into the night, I felt the shift. The law was one thing. Paper, filings, charters, they were tools. But a voice like Mark's, trembling but undeniable, that was power Patricia couldn't control. The dock waited for me at the water's edge when I stepped outside. Moonlight stretched across its railing, turning the cedar silver. My father's work, my daughter's sketches, Mark's confession, they all converged here. The fight was no longer mine alone. Patricia had ruled through silence. Now the silence was broken. Patricia had ruled through silence. Now the silence was broken. The next morning, I drove into the city and parked outside my office. It wasn't my home or my dock this time. It was the State Attorney General's building, the place where every hallway carried echoes of the law I'd sworn to uphold. I swiped my badge, rode the elevator to the 8th floor, and let the familiar hum of fluorescent lights settle me into focus. Here, I wasn't just Daniel the homeowner. I was Daniel Reeve, the state's chief legal officer. Patricia had no idea the battlefield she'd chosen extended right into my world. I set the foreclosure notice and the certified county documents across my desk. Then, I added Mark's confession, scribbled down as soon as he left my kitchen the night before. Each piece alone was troubling. Together, they were a noose tightening around Patricia's board, an expired charter, fraudulent threats, intentional misuse of authority, patterns of misconduct that no judge could ignore, victory strategy, progress. This was the planning stage, pulling every thread together into a counterplan built on legal standing. Patricia had abused fear. I would wield the law. I called a trusted colleague from the Consumer Protection Division. "I need you to review something," I said, sliding the documents across the desk when she arrived. She skimmed, her brows knitting tighter with every page. "They're operating without incorporation?" she asked. I nodded. 2 years expired, and still threatening liens, still issuing fines, still draining, lakes under fabricated pretenses. Her jaw set. "That's not just negligence. That's fraud." I leaned back in my chair. "Exactly. And fraud is something we don't just fight, we expose." Outside my window, the city moved with its usual rhythm. Sirens in the distance, traffic crawling along Main, voices rising and falling in the plaza below. Inside, the air crackled with anticipation. Every step forward was deliberate. Patricia had thrown me into a corner, and now I was building the case that would turn the corner into a courtroom. Because right here, inside these walls, was where Patricia's empire began to unravel. By noon, I had a draft petition spread across my desk. It outlined the expired charter, the invalid authority, the fraudulent foreclosure threats. It cited county records, state statutes, and enforcement guidelines Patricia had trampled over like they were suggestions instead of law. And it included witness testimony, Mark's role as first-hand observer of the lake drainage, and of Patricia's private admission that she knew the charter had lapsed. I stared at the words, feeling their weight. This wasn't about fines anymore. It was about the survival of an entire community under the thumb of one power-hungry woman. My father's dock had been the spark, but the blaze was larger now. Every neighbor who had been fined, every family who had been threatened with foreclosure, every silent victim of her tactics, they were all folded into this case. Late that afternoon, I left the office and walked the courthouse steps again, this time with purpose. I filed the petition with the clerk, the sound of the stamp echoing like a gavel strike. The law was now in motion. Patricia could no longer hide behind letters and threats. She would have to face the truth in a forum she couldn't control. On my way out, I paused by the fountain in the square. Water splashed against stone, steady and clear, a reminder of the lake Patricia had destroyed. My father used to say water always finds a way through rock. That was the law too. Relentless, unstoppable, carving its path through even the hardest barriers. I pulled out my phone and sent Emily a quick message. It's begun. That evening, I returned home to find neighbors clustered along the street, murmuring in low tones. Someone had posted another notice on the community board by the clubhouse. This time, Patricia announcing an emergency meeting for all residents. She was doubling down, gathering her troops, pretending she still held control. Good. Let her call her meeting. Let her cling to power. Because I'd already set the law in motion, and once it moved, there was no stopping it. The dock gleamed under the porch light when I walked past, its cedar railing glowing like it remembered every hand that had touched it. My father's work, my daughter's hope, and now my weapon. Patricia had wanted a fight. She was about to get one. Patricia had wanted a fight. She was about to get one. The emergency meeting was scheduled for Thursday night in the community hall, a low brick building beside the basketball courts. It was the kind of place usually reserved for holiday potlucks or graduation parties, but tonight it carried the weight of a battleground. Folding chairs were lined in neat rows, the smell of polished wood floors lingering in the air. At the front stood the board's table, stacked high with binders and manila folders, props to make Patricia look official. I arrived early, carrying my folder under my arm. Inside were the certified county records, Mark's written statement, and the foreclosure notice Patricia had tried to wield like a hammer. Each piece of evidence was loaded, ready to fire when the moment came. Neighbors trickled in, voices hushed, faces tight with unease. Some avoided my eyes, still afraid of Patricia's reach. Others gave me small nods, quiet signals of support. Emily slipped into the front row with her sketchbook, pretending to draw while her eyes stayed fixed on the board's table. Even at her age, she understood this was more than a meeting. It was history being written. Patricia swept in last, flanked by Marcus and Susan, her posture rigid, smile painted on like armor. She tapped the microphone, clearing her throat. Residents of Willow Crest, thank you for attending on short notice. We are here tonight to address non-compliance issues threatening our property values and safety. Certain individuals have spread misinformation, and it is time to set the record straight. Her eyes flicked toward me, sharp as a blade. The crowd followed her gaze. I rose slowly, the chair scraping against the floor. You're right about one thing, Patricia. It's time for the truth. I placed my folder on the nearest table, flipping it open so the county seal glinted under the lights. Your charter expired 2 years ago. Every fine, every threat, every foreclosure letter, it's all illegal. You've been ruling this community with authority you don't even have. Gasps rippled through the hall. Susan shifted uncomfortably while Marcus crossed his arms, jaw clenched. Patricia's smile never wavered, but her knuckles whitened against the microphone stand. Lies, she snapped. Cheap theatrics. He's twisting technicalities to avoid his obligations. I held up the certified document, reading aloud the expiration date. This isn't a technicality. This is the law. Without an active charter, the HOA has no legal standing. You've been operating as a ghost board. The room erupted in murmurs. Patricia tried to speak over them, her voice rising, but the cracks were spreading. People who had been fined, people who had been threatened. They were all realizing those punishments had been built on sand. Then, from the back of the room, a voice broke through. He's telling the truth. Every head turned. Mark Ellis stepped forward, cap in hand, sweat shining on his forehead, under the fluorescent lights. His voice trembled, but it carried. I was there when Patricia ordered the lake drained. No permits, no county approval. She told us to cover it up, said nobody would question her authority. And when the charter lapsed, she laughed, said no one would ever call her on it. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's hands shook, but he stood tall, the weight of months of guilt finally spilling free. Victory, strategy, progress. This was execution in motion, evidence combined with witness testimony, pulling the board's foundation out from under them. Patricia slammed the microphone down, her voice shrill. You're a liar, a disgruntled employee. But the crowd no longer believed her. Neighbors rose to their feet, demanding answers, voices overlapping until the hall echoed with outrage. Marcus and Susan shrank in their seats, caught in the collapse of Patricia's facade. Because in that moment, Patricia lost her grip on the room, and everyone knew it. I gathered my documents, closing the folder with deliberate care. This wasn't the end. It was the setup. The next stage would leave no doubt. As the meeting dissolved into chaos, Emily slipped her hand into mine. They believe you now, she whispered. I looked down at her and nodded. Belief is the first step. Justice is next. The dock awaited at home, steady against the dark water. Soon, the law would do what it always does, cut through the noise, carve through the stone, and remind Patricia that no one stands above it. The dock awaited at home, steady against the dark water. Soon, the law would do what it always does, cut through the noise, carve through the stone, and remind Patricia that no one stands above it. 2 days later, I walked into the county courthouse again. This time for the hearing Patricia had tried to accelerate. The marble floors gleamed under the morning light, and the smell of old paper and polished wood filled the air. It wasn't just another building. It was the arena where the truth would finally stand on record. Emily sat this one out. She'd wanted to come, but I told her some battles were best fought without the weight of a child's eyes. Inside the courtroom, Patricia sat at the defendant's table, flanked by Marcus and Susan, their faces pale. She wore her usual confidence like a mask, lips pursed, posture stiff, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of panic when I set my folder on the plaintiff's table. The seal of the state attorney general's office embossed on the corner was impossible to miss. The judge entered, robes flowing, gavel striking once to silence the murmurs. Case of Willow Crest, Estates Homeowners Association versus Daniel Reeve, he announced. Plaintiff and defense ready? Ready, Your Honor, I said. Patricia forced a smile. Ready. I opened with the facts, dates, filings, statutory requirements. My voice was calm, deliberate, each word measured like the ticking of a clock. Clock. I laid out the timeline, the last valid charter filing, the 2 years of negligence, the continued issuing of fines and threats despite having no standing. Then I introduced the foreclosure notice, sliding it forward so the judge could see the bold black letters Patricia had tried to use to intimidate me. "Your Honor," I said, "this letter is nothing more than a threat from an entity that does not exist. It's the equivalent of a stranger posting foreclosure on your front lawn." The judge's brow furrowed as he examined the notice. Patricia shifted in her seat, her hands clasped too tightly in her lap. Then I called Mark Ellis. He stepped forward nervously, cap in hand, but his voice carried steady once sworn in. He recounted the night by the pumps, the orders Patricia had given, the laughter when she admitted she knew the charter was expired. His hands trembled, but his words were sharp enough to slice through the silence. "She said nobody would ever challenge her," Mark finished, voice thick with emotion. "She thought fear would keep us quiet. Victory, strategy, progress. This was the moment. Preparation became execution. Testimony and certified records working together to strip Patricia of her last defenses." Patricia's attorney tried to object, claiming Mark was biased, but the judge raised a hand. "Bias doesn't erase facts, and the facts here are damning." The courtroom buzzed with whispers, neighbors who had filled the gallery leaning closer, hanging on every word. Some of them had been fined, some threatened. All of them were realizing the iron grip Patricia had wielded was a mirage. Patricia finally rose, voice shrill. "This is ridiculous!" "So, the paperwork lapsed. Does that erase the board's duty to enforce standards? Does that give him the right to defy us?" "No," I said firmly, turning to face her. "It gives me the right to live free of illegal threats. And it gives this community the right to know they've been manipulated. The law isn't a suggestion. It's binding. You don't get to wield it only when it benefits you. Because Patricia's defiance wasn't strength, it was desperation." The judge tapped his gavel lightly. "I'll issue my ruling soon, but I'll say this now. It appears the board has acted without standing for some time. That is not a matter this court takes lightly." Patricia sank into her chair, her mask finally slipping. Marcus stared at the table. Susan rubbed her temples. For the first time since this war began, the board looked small. As I gathered my documents, I felt the weight of the courtroom air shift. The end wasn't here yet, but it was close enough to taste. Patricia had dragged me into this arena, thinking she could shame me into submission. Instead, she had placed herself on trial, and the verdict was already writing itself in the minds of everyone watching. The dock would stand. And soon, the truth would too. The dock would stand. And soon, the truth would too. Word of the courthouse hearing spread through Willow Crest like fire on dry brush. By the time the weekend came, Patricia tried one last tactic. She called a special community assembly in the clubhouse. Her message framed it as an opportunity to restore order, but everyone knew it was her attempt to claw back control. When I arrived that evening, the hall was already packed. Folding chairs filled every row, neighbors shoulder to shoulder, voices low but charged. Some held HOA violation letters in their hands like evidence of their own. Others leaned against the walls, arms crossed, expressions tight with years of resentment. At the front, Patricia stood behind the podium, Marcus and Susan flanking her like loyal sentries. She wore her signature blazer, but the sheen of sweat along her temples betrayed the pressure. "Residents of Willow Crest," she began, voice pitched high. "You've heard rumors, you've seen accusations. But let's be clear. This community thrives because of standards, and without those standards, we risk everything. Our safety, our property values, our reputation." A few heads nodded, but the murmur of dissent was louder now than ever before. People weren't buying her performance. I rose from my seat in the middle row. "You're right about one thing, Patricia," I said, my voice carrying across the hall. "Standards do matter, but so does the law. And the law says you've had no authority for more than 2 years. The room stirred. Some clapped. Others gasped. Patricia gripped the podium harder. "Don't let him mislead you. He's twisting technicalities to serve his own defiance. Without order, this neighborhood will fall apart." I walked down the aisle, folder in hand, stopping just short of the podium. "Order isn't built on lies. It's built on legitimacy. And you lost that when you let the charter lapse. Every fine, every foreclosure threat, every intimidation, illegal. Every dollar collected under that illusion." Fraud neighbors began standing, one by one. Mrs. Callahan from across the street raised her voice. "You find me for my rose bushes. Hundreds of dollars. And you threatened to tow my son's car when it wasn't even on community property," another man shouted. The crowd's voices rose like a tide, anger and betrayal crashing through the hall. Patricia's composure cracked. She slammed the podium with her palm. "Silence! You will listen?" "No," I cut in, my tone sharp but steady. "You will listen. To them. To the people you swore to serve, but chose to control. You drained a lake without permits, destroyed ecosystems, and laughed about it. You threatened families with foreclosure when you had no standing. You turned this community into your fiefdom." The air buzzed with outrage. Neighbors pressed forward, waving their violation letters, their voices overlapping. "We're done with you. Step down. Enough is enough." Marcus leaned toward Patricia, whispering frantically, but Susan had already leaned back in her chair, defeated, staring at the floor. Mark Ellis stepped forward from the side of the hall, cap in hand. His voice shook, but carried. "I saw her give the orders. No permits, no paperwork, just her word against the law. And I can't stay silent anymore." Gasps swept the room. Mark's confession sealed what little Patricia had left. Because this wasn't just one man against Patricia anymore. This was the neighborhood reclaiming its voice. Patricia's face twisted, her voice desperate now. "You're all ungrateful. Without me, this place will fall apart. You need me." "No," I said firmly, turning to face the crowd. "You don't need her. You need fairness. You need transparency. And you deserve leadership that serves, not rules." The applause erupted like thunder. Neighbors clapped, shouted. Some even stamped their feet against the floor. Patricia's voice was drowned out entirely. I stepped back, letting the roar wash over her. The power she had clung to for years had slipped from her grasp, not because of me alone, but because the community finally saw the truth. Emily appeared at my side, her small hand gripping mine. "They believe you," she whispered again. I nodded. "No, they believe themselves." Now Patricia's reign had ended in the one place she thought she was strongest, her crowd. And the people she had silenced were the ones who delivered the final blow. Patricia's reign had ended in the one place she thought she was strongest, her crowd. And the people she had silenced were the ones who delivered the final blow. A week later, I stood on the courthouse steps again, this time not as a lone homeowner under siege, but as the representative of an entire neighborhood reclaiming its dignity. The judge's ruling had been swift and decisive. Willowcrest Estates Homeowners Association had no legal standing since the charter had lapsed more than 2 years prior. All fines and foreclosure threats were declared void. Patricia was ordered to repay improperly collected funds, and county officials launched an investigation into the unauthorized drainage of the lake. Neighbors gathered around me in small clusters, their voices filled with relief. Some held the violation notices that once carried so much fear, now meaningless scraps of paper. Others simply stood with their arms folded, watching as Patricia was escorted out of the courthouse by deputies, her shoulders slumped and her eyes dark with fury. Emily ran up the steps to me, sketchbook in hand. She had drawn the dock again, this time with the water restored around it, sunlight dancing across the surface. "It's safe now, isn't it?" she asked. I knelt beside her, brushing a hand over the cedar pencil lines. "Yes, Em, it's safe, and so is every family in this neighborhood. Victory, strategy, progress." The plan had reached its resolution. By exposing the lapse in the HOA's charter, combining it with witness testimony and county-certified records, I'd stripped Patricia of every weapon she'd wielded. The law hadn't just leveled the playing field, it had shifted the ground beneath her feet. That evening, the community gathered by the lakeshore. The county had already begun plans to restore the water, promising to reverse the damage Patricia had caused. Mark Ellis stood by the dock, shoulders straighter than I'd ever seen them, the weight of his silence finally gone. Neighbors clapped him on the back, thanked him for speaking out. He looked over at me, nodding once in quiet acknowledgement. I stepped onto the dock as the sun dipped low, cedar warm under my hands. My father's railing had stood through storms, through seasons, through Patricia's tyranny. Now it stood as a symbol of something larger, of legacy defended, of truth revealed, of community reclaimed. Emily slipped her hand into mine, gazing out at the waterline where reeds swayed gently in the evening breeze. "Grandpa would have been proud," she whispered. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "He would have been proud of all of us." Behind us, neighbors laughed freely. Children skipped stones across the shallows, and for the first time in years, the air didn't feel heavy with fear. It felt like home again. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to see a bully's grip on power collapse under its own lies, because that's exactly what happened here. And remember, sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to bow for everyone else to stand. The fight had cost me hours, energy, and the weight of knowing Patricia wouldn't stop until she was dragged down by her own arrogance. But in the end, it wasn't just about me or my father's dock. It was about restoring faith in the idea that communities are built by people, not ruled by tyrants. As the stars came out above Willow Crest, I sat at the edge of the dock, Emily sketching beside me, Mark standing tall among neighbors who now trusted him again. The lake rippled softly under the night sky, carrying echoes of battles fought and won. Patricia had chosen the wrong man to punish. She thought she was targeting one dock, one family, but she'd forgotten that the law has a long memory, and a community's patience has limits. The dock would stand, and so would we. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.